Hello there, fearfully and wonderfully made human. Welcome back to the Holistic Counselor Podcast. It's me, Diana, from Through the Valley Therapy. As always, I'm here to try my best to bring you real conversations, practical insights, and encouragement to support your journey toward whole person healing. I am super excited about today's guest because this conversation has been a long time coming. I first met Dr. Juan Santos at the Wise Practice Summit, where I attended his incredible workshop, Where to Spend Your Dollars While Growing Your Practice. I really needed that workshop. His insights were practical, actionable, and so impactful that I know I wanted to get to know him better. After the workshop, Dr. Santos came to hear me speak on cultivating cultural competence, supporting BIPOC clients in private practice. We had a great conversation afterward, and I knew I had to invite him to the podcast. And after months of working to align our schedules, here we are. Dr. Santos lives in Greensboro, North Carolina, with his wife and two children. He's the owner of Santos Counseling PLLC, an outpatient practice offering individual, family, and couples counseling. His clinical specialties include building and sustaining healthy relationships and conducting immigration evaluations. In addition to his practice, Dr. Santos is a sought after speaker who's presented at universities, corporations, and conferences. You might have also seen him featured on platforms like HuffPost, News 2 WFMY, or 102.1, where he shares his expertise on mental health topics. He's also the co-host of the Couch podcast, where he provides valuable insights into mental health and relationships. So I suggest after you listen to this episode, you go over and check out his podcast. Dr. Santos holds a PhD in counselor education and supervision and is a licensed clinical mental health counselor supervisor with certifications in rehabilitation counseling and ADHD clinical services. His dissertation explored professional counselor competencies in writing extreme hardship waivers for undocumented Latino men, a topic that's as important as it is impactful. So, as we dive into his journey, his work, and the unique ways he's helping individuals and communities thrive, I want us to welcome Dr. Juan Santos to the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Hearing all those things, I'm like, wow. Uh, it's always an interesting moment when someone else speaks about the things that you've done, and you're thinking these are private things, but no, it's good. It's good. We share them with the world. So no
Yeah,
worries.
well, people they are private, but honestly, they're on your website.
That's true. That's true. It's like when I put them on the website, you don't
Yeah.
see everyone around you reading it.
True.
Yeah,
True. And now you're going to have the world hear it because
I
I have.
know it.
Anyway,
All
but
of
you have your own podcast as well. So you know that that stuff's out there. And,
yeah, yeah.
well, before we even start into your journey, like, can you tell me a little bit about your podcast? Because I really didn't know. I honestly, doing this work with having my own
Mhm.
podcast and having different guests on, I usually just study them right before they come, or I've already met them and I've had a relate like us two.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I kind of connected with you at the summit, just because well, first of all, I felt like, oh my gosh, this is what my son should look like. He doesn't. He doesn't.
Hopefully he's not listening.
Oh no, we have a lot of jokes. But
Okay, good.
anyway, yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself, your journey, the podcast, whatever comes to mind.
Yeah. Let's see. So I'll start with where we met at that conference, and I was really drawn to your presentation because it had a lot to do with culture, with diversity, with inclusivity. And I think when it comes to mental health, a lot of us were looking for a space to feel heard, to feel valued, to feel seen. And it highlights those words, inclusivity,
Mm.
culture, openness, awareness, remove the judgment. The podcast that you mentioned, The Couch, it's one through my practice. I co-host it with another clinician there, and we sit like this. It's chilled and relaxed, and we talk about just different mental health topics. I'm always interested in looking for ways to bridge that gap of that financial hardship when it comes to seeking mental health support.
Yes.
So it's not a podcast to tell people what to do, or you got to follow this script. It's more of here's a resource. We go into maybe how to navigate like seasonal depression during the
Mm-hmm.
winter months, or how to work through overthinking. And then we have a back and forth. It's silly, it's fun, educational,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the patients will listen to it. People in the community just gives them a little more support during some of those maybe great times or challenging times, or when you're at home cleaning the house and you want to listen to a podcast, put that one
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was just listening to the overthinking one. And even though I am a clinician, honestly, when you listen to podcasts of mental health, right? And we have to both say, because I know at the end of my episodes, I
Yeah,
always like,
I heard that.
this
Uh-huh.
is not
Disclaimer.
right. Yeah, this is, you need to go get your own, and here you
Mhm.
go, because you have that Instagram therapist, and everybody's like, oh, I have therapy, and I'm like, no, that doesn't count. Like, I mean, it
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of does, but we can't. No, you have to go to real therapists that
Hmm.
have done the training. It's like going to a surgeon and
Yeah.
that never went to school or practiced. Okay. Anyway, the overthinking one, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting a lot of tidbits from this, and it's a good reminder as well for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
That
It's a
was that was a
good,
fun one.
yeah, I bet. So tell me how you've carved out such a unique path in mental health. You have, because when I heard your story when you first shared, and I look at you, right? And then you spoke, and I'm like, whoa, where's that accent from? Because I had no
Mm.
idea who you were really and where you
Yeah.
were from. And then you shared just a little bit of your story. Tell me about that. How, why the mental health field? I knew you grew up in Dominican Republic. I've been there a few times, and I know it's not Puerto Rico. It's Dominican Republic.
Yeah, people tend to say that. But yeah, could continue.
Yeah. So
There's,
tell me about like how, you've been in the field for over a decade. I just want to know how your cultural roots and your approach to therapy and your personal journey all intersect.
mm. This, I think there was a time where I would answer this with a strong, grounded response. And I've learned over the years that it continues to evolve. And
Mm,
then I'm sure that a year from now, 5 or 10 years, that response is going to evolve once again on how those cultural roots influence the work that I do. I find that when we're asked about our story, what's for me, what's neat about it is that there's so many stories around me that motivate me. And at times, it's just those people need a little bit of support to share that story. And there was a time where I wasn't sharing my story because of maybe limitations, barriers, insecurity. So I know that many of us have stories, and I want to highlight that because maybe your listeners they're listening in, and instead of 100% focusing on my story and so forth, know that you have a story, and there's so many people around you that if they heard that story, they would be motivated and say, I relate to that. So I share that item as well for what drives my story. I enjoy sharing it because I've had different individual, and maybe you'll connect with this. What they'll say, "Hey, I relate to that. Like
mm,
I've been through that too," and that continues to be like one of those driving forces of I'll share a story and someone will say, "You know what? That's like mine. I grew up in a certain small town, or I grew up in poverty, or my family was separated, or this happened, that happened, and then that little variable in your story, right? It can have such a tremendous ripple effect. It leads to wonderful conversation and interaction, whether it's with a patient,
mm.
or just someone you meet and talk to at a grocery store.
Yeah, for
Not
sure.
sure if I even answered your question.
Yes, you did. And so people now know a little that you're from Dominican Republic, but can you tell me how old you were? And I also know, you have the country towns of Dominican Republic, and then you have the
Hmm.
city, right?
Yeah.
And so where did you grow up in Dominican
Yeah.
Republic?
I grew up in Monte Cristi,
Oh,
which is a bit more rural. I was about 7 when I moved here. We would go back and forth for several years for my teen years because I've got two older brothers that are about 20 years older. from my mom's first marriage. They had to stay back. They weren't able to get documentation right away. It wasn't until later in my, I think, early 20s that they were able to receive documentation and then come to the U.S. So
Mm.
that created strains, just kind of made it tough. As a
Yeah.
child, I remember with both of them, they felt very much like a father figure. So that was really cool to carry those experiences and then later reconnect with them. Of course, there was what you would assume strain, awkwardness, but also a lot of intrigue and interest. As far as growing up there, it's what most would assume from I believe it's still considered a third world country where we didn't have a lot. Um, but I have a lot of great memories. Like I have neat
Mm.
memories of my older brother was a fisherman, and he would have this wooden boat, and he would take us out. And I'm talking about like what you would if you get on Google and you Google like scuba diving
Yeah.
scenes. Like
Hmm.
I remember jumping in the water. And when it was like, we did the ghetto version. So we would jump in the water and he'd have a spear gun. And
Yeah.
then we'd go in and I would see like lobsters and all of these really amazing fish. And I think about it now because if I go out to get a lobster, I'm like, this is expensive and it's
Yeah.
tiny. And I remember how huge it was, and it didn't
Right.
cost anything other than some sweat
Yeah.
to get there and to enjoy that. I also remember really painful memories, like I wouldn't get peanut butter because it was
Mm.
expensive. So we would have to go to an uncle's house from what my recollection of that memory, and he would have some peanut butter. And this may be silly to some listening to it, but I love peanut butter. Or like cereals.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up eating a lot of these tasty cereals, which
Right.
are not healthy for us, but they taste delicious.
Hmm.
So when I got here to the States and I was introduced to it, I remember as a kid back then, I would really want those. And we just didn't have the money for them. And it's interesting. A lot of those experiences, they've definitely pushed me through life. Like, go to school, study, show up for others. If someone says they need a little more help, stay after. If I'm hired for a job and it's 8 to 5, I'm coming in at 5 a.m. I'm staying till 7 or 8 p.m. I
Mm.
just really built a lot of that gratitude and work ethic of what more can I do?
Hmm.
And I'm grateful for those challenging experiences because I do think they instilled those roots in me very well.
Right. It's resiliency. It's a
Yeah.
resiliency of coming. And so just so you know a little bit of my story, I mean, the listeners know, but for us in our conversation, my mom's from Colombia. And so was born in New York. So I'm that privileged American child, the one that was born here. And so, and my family made me not forget that. Like, okay, we had and it's okay. Like, those are the things I had to work out in my own therapy and my own
Hmm.
walk and my own journey with my family, which I am grateful for now. Like, back then, it's
Yeah.
like they don't understand because they weren't raised in this culture. But the resiliency, though, is what I'm grateful for because my mom gave me the opportunity to really appreciate what we have here. Because when I would go back to her country, she was raised in the country too, like the country of her
Okay.
country,
Yeah.
like a farm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the first time I ever experienced that, I'm coming from Queens, New York, where
Oh
everything, you
man.
have bodegas, you have this everywhere, and I got thrown in, no electric, no water, no running water. It's a farm.
Mm.
It's howler monkeys in the
Yeah.
tree.
Yeah.
So you could imagine, because that sounds like where it's a third world area. It
Yeah.
wasn't Medellin or Bogota. It was like Popayan and a little coffee farm. And
Hmm.
I came back being so grateful, going, oh my goodness. And that's you're right. That's the roots that stay with you.
Hmm.
But I want to know, well, did you know any English, or were you just thrown into these public school? And tell the listener
Yeah.
what count, like where, like, because the Northeast is different than the Southeast and different than the West Coast. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yeah.
where were you thrown when you came?
Looking back, I find that a lot of the Hispanics I'll meet we migrate to like Miami, California, Florida, up north, and there's these hubs
Mm-hmm.
of Latino communities.
Hmm.
One reason or another, North Carolina, Greensboro, like Bible Belt, I get here with my family, and I don't speak a lick of English.
Wow.
So I'm in the classic like ESL classes,
Hmm.
English second language, and which were pretty neat. I mean, I liked them because I got to be around other people that spoke Spanish. And in the standard classes, I were, which I have a huge sense of humor, so I'm very grateful for that. In those classes, I would spend my time laughing
Mm.
or feeling really shy and embarrassed towards that bully category. Um, but the humor I was very appreciative of because when peers would speak English,
Hmm.
they would sound like funny Spanish words. And then I would think, is that what they're saying? Did someone just say fart? So then I'm having like this inside joke with myself. And I think
Right.
that kept me level-headed during those years.
Okay. And when did you finally, so you went to North Carolina? That's where you ended up going to.
Yeah, ended up and still here. Yep, North Carolina the entire time.
Oh,
My
wow. Middle
dad's
school,
fam.
high school.
Yep, elementary, middle,
Okay.
high school, s- uh, graduate school, and all that.
Hmm.
Um, and go ahead. I think you had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to know how was that for you growing up? Like, were you like known as a minority? Because some people like they have their big group of people, right? Were
Yeah,
there other Hispanics or I don't know what Latinos, where brown people,
yeah,
or minority? Like where did you have other a community or were you like the minority? Because there's people that are they get thrown into these other areas and they're just like the only person that's black or the only person that's Hispanic or the only person that's Asian
yeah.
or the only you see where I'm getting at? So
I gotcha. Yeah.
how was it for you?
In the beginning, when we migrated here, it was to a lower economic area.
Okay.
So there was a lot of persons of diversity,
Okay.
black, brown, people from different parts of Asia, which was really cool. Early on, before my parents started to financially level up, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
had a huge diverse friends. I mean, friends from like Morocco, Ecuador, Ethiopia, like all these really interesting
That's
places,
cool.
which was neat because later in life, um, I remember when I met my wife, she was like, "You have friends from like everywhere." And I think I just naturally gravitated to being interested on, well, where are you from? Oh, you're from here? So now I've got like friends around me from all these interesting places. Uh,
Yeah.
Later, once my family started to do a little better financially, we
Hmm.
moved. And then at that point, there was less diversity.
Okay.
And I know I've met other Hispanics or persons of color. And in that, I'll find some relatability there where you start to notice, okay, I think too, going through higher educational programs, I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yes.
There's much less diversity there.
Yeah, I'll never forget when I was introduced to hashtag Black in the Ivory. Ever heard of
Uh,
that?
I haven't, but I'm
Yeah.
adding it up.
Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, I wonder if there's brown in the ivory, because that would be more for me. But I
Yeah,
learned a lot because basically it would be like understanding how, and then me challenging the DSM constantly, the diagnostical
yeah,
statistical manual, because I always brought up like, wait, well, people from other cultures, like and some of my professors loved that I questioned it. Others were like, well, you're in the wrong field. You know how it goes with ego
yeah, yeah,
in a college.
yeah.
So, I mean, it was just a really, this was 20 something years ago. Um, so let's just talk about a little bit about like navigating your identity and the connection because you are a minority in a field like we were just talking about
Hmm.
where I wish I mean I don't know if you have a license in Florida but people need to see themselves at times to
Hmm.
trust, right? And
Yeah,
so tell me what where this has been influenced for you, especially where those may not be feeling seen. Because, and how do you navigate that? Do you get like, are you the one known in your community of like, oh no, he's a Latin male, here's one? Or are you, I bet you're pretty busy,
yeah, yeah.
because of who you are. So how do you navigate that, and what do you suggest for other clinicians that are listening? Because I too
Hmm.
have people from all walks of life listening. Like what do you think Latin males need at this moment?
Mm. I'll try to answer that in pieces.
Okay.
I've learned, and I think I picked some of this up during my doctorate study. I think depending on where you're at in the U.S., right, there's a shift in diversity and color there. So I've got some colleagues up north in New York,
Mhm.
and speaking Spanish is not as a hot commodity, if you will, as where I'm at.
Right.
So then here it's a much more needed service due to there being less of me, individuals who are brown, male, able to speak Spanish, English. So I think that's one item that just to kind of keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
The other, which I'm really leaning and growing into this, is I try to learn a lot from my patients where I've had different ones share with me, I want to work with you because I saw in your bio that your wife is Caucasian,
Mm.
and we're in an interracial relationship, right? So there's items like that, and I get where they're coming from. I understand the ups and downs, the cultural differences, all of those, and it's not something that's spoken as heavily within academia when
Yeah.
it comes to providing care to others. Or there's
Mhm.
parents maybe, and it could be a parent who says, I'm looking for this for my child, and then I think about myself growing up, and I know that my parents looked for those type of things. One memory, and this person I'm forever grateful to. I haven't ever met him again other than when he was there. But I had this I think it was a YMCA mentor early on in middle school, and there was zero relatability. Like he was a Caucasian male. I believe he
Mhm.
was in the medical field, but I would sit with him and he would give me like these amazing talks of going to school, what to look for, just things that my parents didn't have. My mom didn't finish high school in Dominican Republic. My dad did a little bit just after that. They
Mm.
came here and went right to the field of work. So,
Yeah.
and maybe you relate to this as far as the resilience. It was be a professional, but there
Mm.
was nothing else. There was
Right.
Juan, you got to go to school and you got to be a professional. But
Right.
there was nothing else. There was not how do you navigate these things?
Well, it's the
But it's
collective mentality
yeah.
of like Juan, you're here now. You better do something with your life and then help the family.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
It's the collective mentality of like, okay, yeah. So go on. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
That's, exactly right. And that
So
either pushes
yeah.
you forward or burns you out, one of the two.
Well, it's a balancing act that many people that are not from other cultures, like if they're only from one certain culture, they don't understand or they stereotype or they fear, right? And
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
why we have a lot of different tensions around our country. And like, when you were talking about that, yeah, like up in New York in that area, they don't need Spanish people. But guess what? Down here in Miami, we have a lot of Latina therapists, but when I'm trying to find a Latin male therapist, yeah, I have one or two I could count on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's yeah. And so to me, it's like it depends on where you are. Um, so back to, you know, how do you help? Like, what do you think that, depending on where they're from, but the audience is listening and I want them to either if they are a Latin male or this is another thing. Latinx, Hispanic, like what's the big deal about those things? Do you know?
Mm. I'm not even gonna dive into there because I don't know enough
Okay.
uh
It's
to
it's
to navigate that well.
yeah, well, good. And thank you for your honesty. And I really think it is just a cultural thing or the dynamics of different generations,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So
Well,
what would you
there's yeah, also my 2 cents on that,
Mhm.
which I've learned through the years. I did a DNA test not too long ago,
Mm.
and forever growing up, it was Juan. I am Dominican, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is who I am. That is my identity, my roots. And I've learned that there's parts of me from Congo, different regions in Africa, from Portugal, I believe, and all of these different places. And I'm like,
Yes.
this is where this nose comes from. I knew it.
Same for me.
So that's, and I think that's where when I started to learn about Latinx, something in that, I was like, I bet there's more in here that I'm just not
Mm-hmm.
aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's helped me learn about my identity and
Mm-hmm.
learn how to communicate with others. That before I didn't have, and my parents didn't have. It was more
Mm-hmm.
of, Dominican, and then that's it.
Right. I mean, it's the culture identity. I get it too. And for me, I'm half and half. Like my dad's Puerto Rican, and I grew up with that side without my dad because my mom was
Hmm.
a single immigrant mom. But my dad's family was involved in my life, and my dad was sporadically here and there. But and my mom's Colombian, and so and then growing up in New York, that's a whole. And I'm a New Yorker, and then you come in
Yeah,
Florida, and then I was like 12 years old when I moved down here to South Florida, and that was probably one of the biggest culture shocks ever.
I bet. Wow.
Coming
Yeah.
from New York, Queens to South Florida. And back then it was, to me, I was like, I'm moving to the country. I
Hmm.
saw my first alligator and lizards and these weird animals and things, and a lot of racism,
Yeah.
and that's where I'm like, wait, well, you don't even know me. You don't even know me. You're
Hmm.
judging me because of my appearance, and people always thought I was Middle Eastern.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
I bet you do. I
Yeah.
think I
I put I
said
put
something.
a I put a hat on and people are like, "You're from the Middle East."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, some people were like funny about it, but other people were literally racist about it. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? If you're going to like trash me, at least do it because I'm Hispanic,
Hmm.
or whatever. This is probably why we have to have good senses of humor. Ach.
A nice protective mechanism I've developed over the years.
Yes, it's better
Yeah.
to be like that than inwardly angry all the time and destroying and becoming oppositional defiant. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
um, but I want to, the importance of finding the right counselor. I think you might have mentioned that in one of your podcasts, the importance of finding the right counselor. What's a key question that someone can ask when they're looking for the right fit in therapy?
It's a great question. And then there's probably so many key questions. I like what we're doing though, where there's like, we're talking about identity and who we are and what we've done. I think that supports people that are looking for a counselor to like unfold us and look within our layers
Mm-hmm.
because who we are is going to spill out into the work and not in a biased way, but it'll spill out in an informed way, very similar to
Mm-hmm.
being trauma informed, of knowing that, let's say for me, that I come from this marriage, or I was born in this country, or I speak these two languages, right?
Mm-hmm.
Outside of my title, this is part of my identity, and that's going to spill out to some degree in that clinical work. So I think for persons looking for a counselor, a question to ask yourself is, who do you want to sit with that would make you
Mm-hmm.
feel comfortable, that you would feel comfortable shedding those layers with, right? Because often we protect those layers. I may not want to tell somebody this because they're not going to get it,
Mm-hmm.
and it may not be a fault of that person, right? I may not get something that has to do with blank culture because I haven't learned or lived it, and maybe a textbook wouldn't teach me it.
Right.
But I think if I'm a patient, I'm looking for somebody. I'm thinking to myself, what needs to happen for me to feel comfortable in that space?
Right.
From there, I'm a huge advocate of trying to some degree, uh, learn about that person, whether it's like a 15-minute consult, reading their bio, some sort of information that gives you a little bit more.
Yeah.
And this one, I think one of the counselors shared it with me and at the practice, and I guess it's less of a question and more of a manner of introducing yourself to therapy, and is being willing to fall. And that means that you're willing to go to this practitioner's office, knowing that it may not work out,
Mm.
right? And
Yeah.
that's not due to any of your error, and it's not due to their error.
Mm-hmm.
Just something in there didn't align, and that's okay.
Yeah.
There's many others in the field that are ready to help.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. That's great advice. or I mean, great questions to ask, because we're all on our own journey. We all have our own biology, theology,
Hmm.
psychology. And it also depends on resources too, because, you being raised the way you did and the way I did too, right? Seeing that we didn't come from a lot of resources. And that's something too. Like someone will listen to a podcast because they cannot afford $150 an
Yeah.
hour. Or their insurance sucks. Oops, sorry, did I say
Yeah.
sucks? But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
or they want to see you, but you don't carry that insurance. Like, what would you say to someone like that? Like, what are there resources or books, especially for a Latin male, or even like say, you said your wife is a different culture, right? Or
Hmm.
from, she's a white girl, right? So I'm
Yeah.
married to a white man, by the way, and I
Yeah.
have had to teach him so much. We've been together 30 years. I've had to teach him so much, and he's still willing to learn. And it's both of us facing ourselves in, our own identity and then coming together and respecting each
Mm.
other.
Yeah.
Okay. Because, his culture told him stories. My culture told me stories. And now we're here sitting going, what does serve us and what doesn't help us?
Yeah.
Like what kind of human do we want to become? And so for you as a therapist and having your own practice, you know, what resources do you utilize to open the mind of people that you're either serving or because you're a supervisor, you're
Hmm.
clinicians?
Ah, it's a giant question. We'll try to tackle it all at once. Resources, books,
Mm-hmm.
and they can range like the Nidra Glover. She's got a good book on boundaries, emotional intelligence. That's a good book there. I think Daniel something has a book on power of habits. Man's Search for Meaning. That's a popular one in our clinical field. So
Yes.
when I encourage individuals to look at books,
Mm-hmm.
I share try to use it as a exploratory process.
Mm-hmm.
Like, see what you can take in, and then also see what you can apply and microdose. So just little by little apply. And then the exploration, the emphasis of that is to remove judgment, like to just let yourself try versus I'm going to read it with an attitude of I already know that this won't
Mm-hmm.
work, right? Instead,
Wow.
instead you're just going to try, even if you know it won't work, you're going to try and just
Mm-hmm.
see what this experiment, this exploration process does.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, I think that's growing a lot, just like podcasts, where there's professionals, like you and I, we went to school, we know a little bit, and we're sitting on here and we're sharing that. I think that's another valuable resource. With it, keeping in mind patience and the amount of information that you take in. I think that could be like a barrier where you listen to 10 podcasts all day long and you're just like super high on that energy. But you look around and you're like, I haven't done anything,
Yeah.
right?
And
I've learned a lot.
analysis
Paralysis.
paralysis.
Yeah, exactly. I fall victim to that plenty of times.
Yeah. So to me, I would like to tell the listener if you're someone looking for a therapist or you're a Latin male, it's listen to Dr. Juan Santos. Don't binge on 10 episodes. Take one and
Mm,
write down, you know, three thoughts or one little tiny thing you can do,
yeah,
right? It's like
yeah,
I like the microdosing, mentality of like or the atomic habits, it's just
yeah.
getting one thing and practicing it. Or like, okay, today or tomorrow, I'm going to look up. I think there a website for Latin therapy or
I believe so. Yeah.
Latin mail. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. But it's things like that,
Hmm.
or what other books? You're a marriage counselor too, correct?
Yeah. I love that's one of my favorites there. The
Really? And that came to me because I was thinking of Gottman, and I am not a marriage counselor. I need one. Just kidding, honey. No, I'm not kidding. But yeah, so I
Yeah.
would like to know a little more about like that before we wrap this up.
Yeah, I love the marriage work. I think because it's similar to the to what we're doing, where you're going deep into the roots, right? Like a marriage is your story, their story. You have friction, but it's not a quick band-aid that's going to fix it, right? It's these deep, long, heavy, not fun, right? Challenging conversations, but they're needed. It's like needed confrontation that we often spend our whole life avoiding. And then there's the aspect of repair, which I absolutely love about a marriage or a relationship. And repair, that the emphasis of that is you will always have to repair elements of your relationship. Had
Mm,
one individual I worked with a while ago, and we're doing a walk and talk. So when I work with couples, I'll do sessions together. I do them long, like 2+ hours. So one section is me and him, and we're walking, and then he says, am I always going to have to do this? And what he was referring to was like, can he get to a point where he's done enough and then she is satisfied? So then I started laughing. And then he's like, don't laugh at me. I'm being serious. And so then I was like, all right, well, repeat the question. So then
mm,
he repeats that, is there a point where it's just enough? Like I'm done. And then I was like, I want you to think about that. If she said that to you, is there a point where she can do enough for you just to be satisfied, and then, you leave her alone? There's no more dates, no more nice words, no more gratitude, no more coffee together, no more tea.
mm.
And then he thought about it and he was like, okay, I see the humor. And that was it was a great moment. He grew from it, and we moved forward. But that's
Mhm.
the repair, like knowing that the relationships are like waves. You're going to
Yeah.
have these elements and points that there's friction, there's struggle, and helping people know how to repair.
Hmm.
That keeps a relationship really structured and healthy. So yeah,
Yeah.
I could talk about this all day. I thoroughly love relationships. I try to implement as much of my cultural roots in there.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is I approach relationships from a identity, a trauma, a cultural informed position. I look at the two individuals at a deep, deep level and what are they bringing in? And
Mm.
then from there, we look at how does that connect to the challenges that you're having.
Okay. Wow, that's really wonderful. I would love to have you. I know that time is short and you have clients and I have clients as well. And so to me, I would love to have you on just to talk about couples things. But are there any books or podcasts or anything like that that is about couples, like if someone's listening to and they're in a relationship that you would recommend?
Yeah, let's see. My training is intertwined with Gottman and Sue Johnson.
Mm.
Um, so, and hopefully I just said those names right. There's a book called Hold Me Tight. That's a really good one.
Okay.
And there's Seven Pillars by the Gottman. So those are really amazing books. They have a lot of action-oriented support and structure.
Mm-hmm.
Podcasts from time to time on I'm gonna plug mine in. I'll do little episodes on relationship elements that could be helpful. They're very
Hmm.
much action oriented. This is happening, try this, or here's something to keep an eye out when it comes to a relationship.
Yeah.
And then the final tool, which I would put above every other tool, and I say that purposefully because often the opposite happens with individuals when they're working on their relationship. And that tool is the individual work. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So when your relationship has a strain, first look at just you, right? Like, can I plug myself into therapy? Can I plug myself into a self-help book? And then work on as much as you can on just you.
Right.
And from that, a lot of positive can happen. There was actually a therapist, and I can't remember the name of it. I wish I could, that wrote a book on how to fix your relationship
Hmm.
without your partner, like just you.
Okay.
And it's neat because if you think about it, there's things that you can actually do,
Yeah.
right? Like you could go towards your partner and show a smile,
Hmm.
and that's probably going to be warm towards them. But you
Yeah.
could also show a like mean face,
Hmm.
and then that's going to create some sort of friction.
Yeah.
And both
Yeah.
of those have to do with just you. So
Yeah.
a lot of the book is on that. But
Yeah.
yes, if you'll have me, I'll happily show up and we'll have a fun conversation about it.
Yeah, about marriage, totally, completely. That would be wonderful. I just wanted to get the audience to get to know you, and I was just excited to have a conversation with you, Dr. Santos. Are you going again to the Y? Are you speaking? I mean, I don't know how connected you are with the WISE practice. summit thing or not?
Yep, I got the invite. I don't think I'll be going this time
Oh,
around.
okay. But maybe I'll see you and other things, or who knows? Well, I'll get you back on here, and hopefully our paths will connect again.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Anyway, listener, thank you for coming and putting your ears on this, or if you're on YouTube watching. And don't ever forget to trust in the Lord, guard your heart, and renew your mind. Bye. And now for the disclaimer to make sure you understand that you are responsible for you. The content provided on the Holistic Counselor podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or mental condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast are my personal opinions and do not represent the views of any professional organizations with which I am affiliated. Call your doctor, 911, or 988 immediately if you have a medical emergency. The Holistic Counselor podcast does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Holistic Counselor podcast, guests appearing on the podcast at the invitation of the Holistic Counselor podcast, or other listeners to the podcast is solely at your own risk. Confidentiality notice. If you engage with the Holistic Counselor podcast by commenting or posting and are a client, please be aware that you may be revealing information that could compromise your confidentiality. Please remember that disclosing your identity or personal details can be linked to your clinical material. As a therapist, I am bound by confidentiality and will not respond to any disclosures of this type on this podcast. I am committed to upholding the ethics and confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship, which extends to all forms of communication in accordance with the laws and professional guidelines that govern mental health professionals. I want you to know that your privacy is of utmost importance, and you are responsible for protecting it when interacting on this platform or any other public forum. Thank you.